Okay. Happy Monday. Do a little Torah roundup this Monday morning. It's freezing here in Michigan. Okay, so what can I say? So Tanya this week, we'll just go over the Tanya very briefly. The Tanya speaks about garments of the soul. I know we've spoken about it many times in Tanya class in the past. Garments of the soul. What are the garments of the soul? Well, much like the garments refer to thoughts, your speech, what you say, and your actions, what you do. And just like garments can be exchanged, you can take a garment on and off, put on a nice garment, a soiled garment, whatever you want. Same thing, your thoughts, you don't have to dwell on your thoughts. Your speech, you can be careful with what you say, and your actions, you can be careful with how you act, obviously. I tell my kids all the time. I tell myself all the time. What are the holy garments? The Torah wants us to get into holy garments. The holy garments refer to Torah. If you think Torah, you speak words of Torah, and mitzvot, which are connected with actions. What happens? What's the whole big deal about Torah and mitzvahs? Torah and mitzvot. So before the soul comes into this world, it's asked, do you want to go to this world? And she responds back to God saying, well, what's in it for me? And God says, you'll be raised up to a higher level than you are the level you're at right now. And the way that works is there are 5 points to the soul, which we've spoken about. There are 5 levels to the soul: the nefesh, ruach, chaya, neshama, nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, nichida. We spoke about it many times. And the 4 lower levels of the soul are just that. They're lower than the essence of God. The essence of God has no end. So even once you reach the essence, you keep going. It's a little Kabbalistic. But the lower levels never even reach the essence, except if they come to this world. Because just like we have many layers to ourselves, it says, you have the conscious self, the subconscious self, the super subconscious. We have many layers to who we are. We have our thoughts, our emotions, our desires. And it says in the beginning of the Torah that God created us in his image. So just like by studying ourselves, we can understand God. So just like we have different levels within ourselves, so does God. And what's the essential point? The essence of God is called Atzmos. But what the Rambam says something. He says, what makes us different than God, even though we're made in the image of God, we're obviously not God, but a big point of difference is that God is he's completely aware, and he's in complete control of all of his different levels. He's fully aware of his subconscious self, his super subconscious self, his essential self. He has complete control. And it says that God created the Torah and the mitzvot from within the level of his essence. Now, it's a pretty nifty trick. We can't really do that, but he did that. And so therefore, what the Torah is, has different layers to it, many layers to it, which we always try to get into in our classes, revealing the layers, especially Schneer's class, Rabbi Schneer's class. We try to peel away those layers. You try to get to the essence of everything. So by doing Torah and mitzvot in this world, the lower levels of the soul become enclosed into God's essence, and thereby become elevated. They become elevated. Now that's not revealed to us, and we don't see that. We won't see that until Mashiach comes, or until really the soul, if God forbid before that, when the soul leaves the body, which we'll talk about in this week's parsha and especially next week's parsha. The soul leaving the body and Shiva and all these different things, the journey of the soul. But nevertheless, the soul sees that, the different levels of the soul see that, if I go into this world, this is my chance to be enclosed into God's essence, bask in the rays of God's essence. I accept mission, and it comes out into this world. What does it mean it comes out into this world? It moves to a place that's further and further away from God's essence. That's what I mean coming down. Yeah. The truer part of you is the deeper you go, is the more true part of you. Yeah. Your thoughts, thank God I probably can't read your thoughts, because who knows what kind of thoughts you have in your mind. And you don't want other people to see that, but that's really what's going on within you. And you can go deeper and deeper. Yeah, we have desires. Sometimes we have, desires for something that's not good. The Tanya speaks about it all the time. But as long as you don't dwell upon it, you don't speak it, and certainly don't act upon it, that's great. That's the Beinoni. The Beinoni is the one who doesn't act upon it and doesn't dwell upon it and doesn't speak about it. And you'll change. Over time, you change. So that the Tanya, that's what's unique about this world. Only in this world can you do Torah and mitzvahs. God only placed it in this world, meaning the physical world, the world which is furthest away from God's essence, from the truth, so to speak. So the soul was very excited to come down. Then it comes down and it says, whoa, this sucks. Like, this is a very dark place. But with time, it begins to appreciate what it has and sees actually the essence of even the physical parts of this world, and the spirituality. Even physicality can be spiritual. That's our job, is to spiritualize the material and materialize the spiritual, if you want a nice phrase. Anyway, that's this week's Parsha, and it actually it kind of connects pretty well to this. That's this week's Tanya, and it kind of fits in pretty well with this week's Parsha. Okay, so getting into the Parsha's Vayigash, the showdown between the brothers. What did we leave off? We left off that last week, Binyamin. Well, Yosef said, I want Binyamin to come here. And Yehuda and Yaakov, the father, said, no way, Jose. He's not going down. And Yehuda says, I'll give up my portion in the world to come. Not only my portion in this world, but in my portion of the world to come. And with that, if I don't bring him back. And with that, Yaakov says, fine. If that's, I see that you mean it. You're putting your money where your mouth is. And he brings him down. And Joseph once again frames his brothers to try to get Binyamin to capture Binyamin and get a moment with Binyamin. And there's different commentaries about why did Joseph act so cruel, so to speak, to his brothers. But one commentary is that it was a way of rectifying what they did. In other words, he wasn't doing it for himself, but it was to avoid punishment, so to speak, or consequences, negative consequences in the next world. I know there's a million questions that you're going to ask. What do you mean? We actually ended up paying for it much later. We say in the Yom Kippur prayer that certain rabbis had to be killed as a rectification for what the brothers did. Yeah, okay. We'll get into that when time comes. But nevertheless, that's what he did. And what happens? They bring Binyamin, and Joseph gets some time alone with Binyamin. And he says, he frames him, and he says, Binyamin has to be my slave. And it says, and this is where this week's Parsha opens up, Vayigash alav Yehuda. It says, Judah, approached his brother Joseph. And it says, Rashi says he approached him in a way of ready for battle. The brothers were more than ready to not only take on Joseph and his guards, but the entire Egyptian army in order to bring Binyamin back, their brother Binyamin back. And thank God they didn't have to. Joseph sees that the brothers felt very, very bad, and he felt terrible about the whole sale, and they loved their brother Binyamin. And he asks his guards to leave. It's very dramatic, and he reveals himself to the brothers, and he says, "I am your brother Joseph. Is my father still alive?" That's what he says, which is kind of a bizarre thing to say. And he weeps extremely loud that the whole house heard what had happened. And he says, "Do not fear, my brothers. You did nothing wrong. God set up this whole chain of events so that I can keep you alive." And then he ends off with the famous line, "Is my father still alive?" And the Tanya actually says this is the way to, if somebody has wronged you, this is actually the proper way to respond. It's a very high level, obviously. But we see that the brothers obviously did something terrible to him, and he responded, "Don't worry, everything you've done for me is all in the, Gamzu L'Tova. This is all for the good. Thank God I'm in this position now because I'm able to sustain you and keep you alive. Not only you, but the entire this entire area of the world. In other words, how's the famous saying go? You intended to give me a cup of poison, but it turned out to be a cup of wine. And he shows the brothers his bris milah, his organ, and which is also kind of bizarre. Why would he do that? So there's different answers why he says it. Rashi says because to show that he's Jewish and to show him that I'm really Joseph. I know you don't recognize me, but now you'll recognize me. But the Zohar gives a different explanation. The Zohar says, first the Zohar asks, Joseph had made the entire Egyptian people circumcise themselves. Says it clearly in the Torah. So what good was it that he showed them? He pulled down his pants. What did that show? What he was showing them is, not only am I Joseph, your brother, and I'm the ruler of this entire land, but I remained frum. The catch over here is that I remained a Torah observant Jew. And I didn't, I know I lived in the most promiscuous country during the most promiscuous time, a place of decadence. But nevertheless, I remained moral, and I never misused my bris milah. And with that, I guess they saw, whatever, they're spiritual people, they're able to see things that we're not able to see, that it really was them, and they were stunned. The Torah says they were speechless, and they were scared. And the question is, why does he say, and it fits in very well with, why did he say, is our father still alive? I'm Joseph, don't worry. It was all, you did it. Thank God you did it the way you did it. Everything worked out for the way it should have. Is father still alive? Why is that? He asked him 5 times already. If we read last week's parsha, he asked him 3 times, is your father still alive? They said, yeah, our father is still alive. So why is he asking him again right now? So there are many different explanations. A very famous explanation is the Abarbanel, who was the Abarbanel, by the way? Yitzchak ben Yehuda, who lived during the Spanish Inquisition. And he was, who was he? The Minister of Finance for Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. The Minister of Finance. He was very wealthy as well. He lent them money. And he was a genius. And he came from aristocracy, and he was Torah giant, very frum. Just an interesting story. When in 1492, when they went to go expel the Jews, the Spanish Inquisition or Spanish expulsion, he was lobbying. He went to them and he was asking Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand to not do it. And they respected him so much, they said, we don't want this decree to be upon you, or Yitzchak, or Barbanel. We'll actually keep 10 men here, and you'll have your own minion in a special shul. It's a true story. And while everybody else gets expelled, and he said, no, I can't do that. And with that, he left together with the entire Jewish people of that period of time, and went to Naples. He was in Italy. He was friends with the king over there, Queen Isabella or King Ferdinand. Told that king, don't let them in. And he gave them the finger. The king in Naples said, who are you? And he gave him the finger, and he let everybody come in. And then eventually France took over Naples at the time. But yeah, check it out. It's a very interesting story. And the Abarbanel passed away penniless because he kept lobbying. He kept trying to get Jews safe and whatnot. But thank God we have his writings. He's a super genius, as the rabbi would say. And he explains that the reason why he asked him if he was alive is because they were very scared. And he was saying to them, he wasn't really asking them. He said, don't worry, I'm not going to kill you. Father is still alive. I'm not going to kill you as long as our father is alive. How could I kill you? Our father is still alive, so to speak. But a lot of people take up with that. And the Rebbe has a different, obviously I'm a Lubavitcher Chassid, so I'm going to give you what the Rebbe has to say. And what he was really asking is, the Talmud says that if God forbid somebody, you believe someone is dead, but they're really alive, you'll never be consoled. The soul will never be able to, you'll never have what's called menuchas hanefesh. You'll never be settled. You'll never be consoled. And so what Joseph was asking is, how could I've been away for 22 years? 22 years. When I left, my father was already old and he was frail. How could he still be alive? Tell me the truth. Now that I'm telling you who I am, tell me the truth. Is he really still alive? And they said, he said, if he is alive, bring him right now. And that's what they did. They left right away. And Joseph sent cows, these cows with them. He sent them money and he sent them all these different things, but he sent cows, which is kind of random. When the brothers arrived to Yaakov, to tell him that Joseph was alive, Yaakov didn't believe him. And he said, yeah, he's alive. And we promise, come right now. And he said, I'm not leaving. And then the cows arrived, meaning it was a chariot, I think, with a golden chariot that brought these cows. What were these cows? Why these cows? What were these cows? Why is it so significant about these cows? With that, Yaakov knew that he was alive. What happened? What's the story? There's a mitzvah. There's a Torah. In the Torah, there's something called the Egla Arufa, which is a mitzvah. God, I don't think it ever happened, but if somebody, God forbid, is found dead between two borders, let's say the head is on one side of the border, one side of the county, and the head is found on another side of the county, or two different towns, or the feet are on the other side, and they don't know who the killer is. Both towns have to come together, and they kill a cow, and they split the cow, and they burn the cow. Whatever. It's a weird mitzvah. It's a mitzvah that doesn't make any sense, as many of them, a lot of them don't. It's called Egla Arufa. And the Medrash says that Jacob, Yaakov, and Yosef were studying the laws of the Egla Arufa, of these cows. What do we do with these cows? Right before he was taken away. And Yaakov when he saw the cows, and I guess whatever they had on them and whatever they said on them, that's when he knew that his son was truly alive. And it said the spirit of godliness returned to Jacob. What's the spirit of godliness? The Torah tells us refers to prophecy. As we explained many times, that prophecy cannot rest upon a person who's sad or depressed. It only rests in someone who's joyful. So explained many times that joy, how does the Tanya explain joy? Joy is an open vessel. It allows you to receive. It can be misused as well, but it allows you to receive. You can receive. You're an open vessel, and so therefore you're open to prophecy. Maybe we'll do the laws of prophecy again at some point. It's very interesting. You can't just be a prophet. You got to be a super genius, and obviously, a state of joy is the foundation. But you got to be joyful. And because he was depressed for 22 years, the spirit of prophecy never rested upon him, and now it returned. And he was like, okay, let's go. But the Torah says that Jacob was scared. He was scared to go down. He was scared to go to a place of such immorality. And God reappeared to him. After 22 years, God reappeared to him and said, don't worry, don't be afraid. I'm coming with you. It's a classic line from God. I told Moses that. I told Abraham that. Don't worry, I'm coming with you. And the Torah goes on to explain that there were 70 souls went down to Egypt. The number 70 is very significant. The 70 nations of the world. It says that each one of these souls correspond to one of the nations in the world. Sure, there's like 198 nations, you might say. But the Torah says there's 70. There are 70 main nations in the world. And each one of these souls correspond to one of them, which actually fits in very nicely. There's a fast coming up next week called Asara B'Tevis, the 10th of Tevis. It's the shortest fast if you live in the northern hemisphere. Because I don't know, like over here it starts at like 6:50 in the morning and ends at like 5 o'clock in the evening. So you can definitely eat breakfast and dinner. What happened? So there are a few things that happened, but one of them in particular was on the eighth day of Tevis. Right, we're now in the month of Tevis. On the 8th day of Tevis, a king in Greece commanded 70 sages to translate the Torah into 70 different languages. No, I'm sorry, to translate it into 70 of them should translate it into Greek. And whatever, he had some sinister plan why he wanted them to do it. He wanted them to actually, hopefully a mistranslation, and show that the Torah is not valid. And therefore, all the Jews who were always looking for an excuse not to be observant now had an even greater excuse not to be observant. But nevertheless, it was a big miracle. And they all translated it perfectly, but it didn't help at the end of the day because whatever. There's a saying, there's a sheriff over here told us, if you want to find something, if you follow somebody long enough, you'll find a reason to pull them over. Whatever. If this didn't work, they'll find a different reason to hurt us and kill us. But it says during those 3 days that the rabbis took to translate the Torah into Greece were the 3 darkest days in our history, culminating on the 10th of Teves. Also, the 10th of Teves is when Nebuchadnezzar surrounded Jerusalem and eventually besieged Jerusalem on the 9th of Av. But this is the beginning of the downfall of Jerusalem and our glory and the holy people. So we fast on the 10th of Teves. Anyway, just going back, so 70 souls went down to Egypt, which is going to be significant because in about 210 years, the Jewish, not about 210 years, maybe 170 years later, the Egyptian people are going to say, the Jewish people are becoming extremely numerous and they're powerful. We have to enslave them. And that's what's going to happen. The Torah is going to say there are millions of Jews. So we actually, populated very quickly, which is a great miracle. So Jacob comes down, he reunites with Joseph, and they cry, but instead of him saying I love you, he says Shema Yisrael. He uses out that emotion to give it towards God. Again, this is the level of a tzaddik. Everything is for God. So he says Shema Yisrael. Before he comes down, the Torah says he sets up a yeshiva in Goshen. What's Goshen? Goshen is the suburb, a Jewish suburb, as the rabbi would say, a Jewish suburb. And he sets up a yeshiva over there. Yehuda sets up a yeshiva, so they have a place to learn and study and to have influence. And Yosef then brings his father to Pharaoh, and Yaakov gives Pharaoh a very famous blessing, and this blessing is going to serve Pharaoh very well, and he's going to believe himself to be a god. What's the blessing? It's an interesting blessing that the waters should rise when you, whenever you approach a body of water, the body of water will rise up. So if you go to a well, the water will come up. You don't have to put a bucket down to get it up. It'll come up automatically. With that, eventually, Pharaoh, or he tells that perhaps, I don't know if it's the same Pharaoh. It's unclear whether it's the same Pharaoh or that blessing just continued on to his children, the next pharaohs, or for all pharaohs. But with that, Pharaoh would tell everybody that he's a god, and that's why everybody worshipped him. Yeah, like King Jong-il, essentially, made himself look like a god, made everyone believe he's a god, except for Moses. The best part of Pharaoh would say, I don't defecate. When Moses would go talk to Pharaoh, he would specifically speak to him early in the morning, says the Torah. Why early in the morning? Because Pharaoh would go to the Nile River and sit on the toilet, so to speak. And Moses knew that, and God told Moses that. So it would humble Pharaoh when he would go speak to him, and then Pharaoh would listen to what Moses had to say. Now, it didn't follow through with what Moses had to say, but nevertheless, listen. Moses kept the secret, though. He didn't tell anybody. Now, all the money and the possessions in the Torah goes on to explain that all the money and the possessions in the land of Egypt now belonged to Pharaoh. The famine was going to last this is during the second year of the famine. There was another 5 years left. And the people had no more money. They had no more grain. So Joseph then said, okay, sell me your properties. And then gave them money. They had money on layaway. And then he had certain taxes. At the end of the day, Pharaoh had all of the money. Well, Joseph, but really Pharaoh had all of the money and possessions. And the people then had to sell themselves. And they became slaves, so to speak. Indentured servants, really. Another way to become very powerful is to become very rich. Take the money of your people. But he fed them nevertheless. And everything worked out fine and hunky-dory. But the Torah says something very interesting. I find to be very interesting. It says that Joseph made everybody move around. Wherever you were living, you were not allowed to live there anymore. You had to go to a different county, a different city, a different a different part of Egypt. Why did he do that? Because he did it for his family. His family came in to Goshen, And he didn't want them feeling like immigrants, greeners. Yeah, greeners. Is that like the famous thing? People would come off the boat. Back in the day, you used to get a green card right away. He didn't want them to make them feel like greeners. And so therefore, everybody had to move around, and everybody was basically starting anew, so to speak. Which begs the question, that seems pretty mean. You made everybody move around. So the Torah was trying to teach us, the Torah is not always fair. The Torah could be militant, certainly. There's beautiful parts of the Torah, but the Torah is truth. And sometimes there's military action that's needed. Sometimes there's harsh criticism that's needed. And sometimes in order to do what's best for your family, sometimes you have to do what you got to do, the Torah says. Now, you shouldn't be doing it for selfish reasons per se, but the whole point of, the whole point of what the Jewish people, Jacob's family is working towards something. Why is Yaakov so sad that Yosef went away? Why was he inconsolable that his son passed away, or was taken, passed away, but like to an extreme level, extreme extent? Because he saw the building of the Jewish people, which will culminate at the giving of the Torah and eventually the temples and Mashiach, was going to be done through Joseph. They were all working towards one goal. Adam is working towards one goal. Noah is working towards this goal. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are working towards this goal. They're not just here to have a good time or really, build up their own spiritual pursuits. That's why they weren't interested in living they lived in Israel. Israel wasn't the best land was Egypt. Egypt was a much better land. It produced much greater. It was much more beautiful. Maybe even still today, I don't know. But they're all working towards this goal, and the goal now seemed to be cut off. So they're all working towards this one goal. And so Joseph said, I need them to be safe. I can't have them be molested or bothered. So therefore, I'm going to make everything milbalbel, mixed up, and whatever it needs to do in order for them to continue on the mission. And the Torah says, that's what you got to do sometimes. It's in the interest of the business. It's in the interest of the team. It's the interest of the goal. It's not about the individual always, but it's about the ultimate goal. So that was an interesting point. I always thought was very interesting. So there's like something significant about Yosef and Yehuda's confrontation, which we open up about the confrontation. Like we said, the Torah has layers. We have layers. God has layers. We all have layers. If you peel away onions have layers. If you peel away the layers, there's depth. So what is this concept? What is Joseph? What does he represent? He's not just a person he's a person and there's a story, but he also represents something. Yehuda also represents something. He's an Indian, he's an idea and in our service of God and the service of the world. What are they? Who are they? What are they? Is probably a better example, is something else a better way to ask it. So Kabbalistically speaking, Yosef refers to the Sephira. Remember the Sephirot? Rabbi Weinberg will talk more about Sephirot in the Tanya class tomorrow. But he's the Sephira of Yesod, which means foundation. But what does it mean? It means connection. It really talks about connection. He had an ability to connect with everybody, all types of people. He was totally involved in the material world. It's probably why we relate to him so much and to his struggles. While Yehuda represents selflessness, he's the sphere of Malchus, kingship, which is selflessness. The ability to be spiritually, dedicate your life to spirituality. And there's this constant battle between the spiritual side and the physical side, and which should take precedence. We know that the physical world is really what it's all about. It's about the physical world, but it's also about the spiritual world being infused in the physical world. So there's this constant confrontation. And it says there are going to be two Mashiachs, a Mashiach from the house of Joseph and a Mashiach from the house of Yehuda, from Judah. It says that the Mashiach of Joseph probably already came. And that represents, the real working within the world, the refinement in the world. And the ultimate, the Mashiach that we always talk about is the Mashiach of Judah, of Yehuda. King David comes from the tribe of Yehuda. Solomon comes from the tribe of Yehuda. Most of us actually come from the tribe of Yehuda because King David married a lot of women and they had a lot of kids. And King Solomon also married a lot of women and had a lot of kids. So there's a good chance that we all come from there. and it's talking about this constant battle that you have to should be involved in the world, but Yehuda should approach Joseph, that you should bring the spirituality, this level of selflessness, the spirituality into the world, into the Joseph, into the spiritual parts. And I'm sure Rabbi Schneur will actually unpack a lot of that on his Wednesday class. Just looking through the parsha over here, when Joseph gets reunited with his father, he says, "I want to. I'm bringing a sacrifice," and he brought a sacrifice on behalf of his the God of Yitzchak. He called God the God of Yitzchak. Should have called him the God of Yaakov, right? We say in our prayers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. So why didn't he say the God of Jacob? Why specifically the God of Yitzchak? So the Torah here is trying to tell us, is there an obligation to honor your grandparents? We have an obligation to honor our parents. That's clear in the Torah. That's in the Ten Commandments. What about your grandparents? And some would say that it's probably even greater to honor your grandparents. Why? Because not only are they a parent, but they're older. And we know the Torah is very much into honoring scholarly people, wealthy people, and older people. So they have this like double whammy. They're older and they're like a parent. So it turns out, though, but if most agree that honoring your parents is a portion, it's like a chelik, it's a part of honoring your parents. Because whoever your parents want to honor, because you have an obligation to honor your parents, so therefore whoever they honor, you should honor as well. It's all a part of honoring your parents. Whatever that was, the Torah wanted to interrupt. Now, it's not a Torah obligation. There's no direct obligation. And therefore, if it comes to a point where you should honor your parents or honor your grandparents, your parents take precedence. But nevertheless, says the Torah, I'm going to tell you a story. We're going to make a little episode to say that you have to honor your grandparents as well. And in fact, it is a part of honoring your parents. Obviously, if it comes to your spouse or your parents, you honor your spouse before your parents. That's clearly written in the Torah. And I want to end with something very interesting, and it's going to tie in very well to next week. I find this to be extremely fascinating. It says God speaks to Jacob at the end of the parsha, and God tells Yaakov that Yosef will place his hands on your eyes. Don't worry, go down to Egypt. Everything will be fine and good. Yosef will place his hands on your eyes. It's kind of a bizarre line. So the Zohar really takes this to town. And he says, I'm just looking at the Zohar right now, when a person passes away, God forbid, but it happens, you place dirt on the eyes of the deceased. And the Zohar says, what we learn it out from this week's parsha. Why? What happened in this week's parsha? It says, the Zohar says that when a person passes away, the moment they pass away, or a moment before they pass away, the soul gets a glimpse has a godly revelation. Now, whatever we've read in stories, I had an out-of-body experience, I felt light, the Torah's not into that. That doesn't, I don't think that really jives. I'm not saying they didn't feel that and those things didn't happen, but that is not the revelation it's talking about. There is a revelation and that the eyes actually see. And so therefore it sees holiness. It sees this kedusha. And therefore we don't want the eyes afterwards to see the physical world again, because the physical world is whatever, it's hiding godliness and it's unholy, so to speak. It's holy, but it's unholy. So therefore, there's an obligation right away to close the eyes of the person who's deceased, and you place dirt. And the dirt, the dirt basically buries the eyes. That's part of the idea. What does it mean burying the eyes? Because it's now in the other world, the hidden world, and therefore it's not looking in this physical world anymore. It's not attached to this physical world, so to speak. We don't want it to see. Even though, obviously the person has passed away, but spiritually speaking, we don't want them to see the physical world. Whatever this means, this is always, Zohar stuff is more Kabbalistic. So therefore, we cover the eyes. What Joseph was saying, what God was telling to Yaakov, don't worry, you're going to have an easy transition into the next world. You know, you're going to a place of immorality, of decadence, and you're now basking in spiritual rays and spiritual life here in the land of Israel, and yada, yada, yada. And you're afraid that now you might get into something immoral. You're going to get into a place where it's very physical, very materialistic. Don't worry, Joseph, the transition will work. The transition into the spiritual will be seamless. He will cover your eyes, so to speak. And the Zohar goes on to explain, I don't understand what all this means, but the Zohar goes to explain what the Shiva is all about. What is a Shiva? It says, why do we sit in the house of someone who passed away? Why do we sit there? Because it says when the soul leaves the body, it actually bounces, it sort of, transports between the grave and the house that it came from. It has an attachment. There's an attachment to the home. Just like there's an attachment to the body, there's an attachment to the home. And we sit in the house so that when the soul comes, we comfort it. We're comforting the soul. And the soul we tell positive stories. We tell positive stories about the soul. We don't share words of Torah, but we speak positively over the soul. And it bounces back and forth for 7 days until it finds menucha. It finds what menucha means, like, serenity in the grave. And then it begins to, all the parts of the soul begin to elevate. And it takes about 12 months. It takes 11 months. That's why we say Kaddish for 11 months. The Kaddish helps ascend, like we explained before in Siddur class. What's a Kaddish? The Kaddish is referred to as a pillar. A pillar connects the bottom to below. It moves up this pillar, says the Zohar, eventually making it up to these different deeper levels of spiritual reality. It's going back to its source, so to speak. But now the lower levels of the soul are coming along with it. The nefesh, the ruach, the chaya, nefesh, ruach, neshama, and the chaya are all going back to the essence of God. They have the ability, they're prepared, they have enough clothing, they're fitting to stand before the king, so to speak. Yeah, they've earned their share. And they move closer, but they're more refined. They've experienced it enough, the essence, to appreciate what they're about to. They're a vessel, or a fitting vessel. So they're moving closer and deeper within God's essence. And that, when you help it move deeper and deeper into God's essence every year on the yard side, right? The way the time is a spiral, that it's not linear. So each year we revisit the energy of the previous year and we elevate it. And eventually that's what we do. We give Kaddish for the rest of the year. Now, also saying words of Torah, studying on the behalf of a soul, is, some say, even more powerful than saying the words of Kaddish. That's why very often, what if somebody, God forbid, a parent passes away and they only had daughters? The daughters don't say Kaddish. So what do? What they should do is they should sponsor, or they should learn words of Torah, or have other people say words of Torah and somebody else say Kaddish. But to make sure to complement it with words of Torah. We say words of Torah, we learn words of Torah before we even say the Kaddish. That's part of it. Anyway, I just found that to be very fascinating that it's from this week's Parsha. And next week, we're going to talk about the famous machlokis, the famous argument of whether, from the Zohar versus the Talmud, did Jacob really pass away? Did Jacob really pass away? And it's a fascinating topic, and it's an approach to life, and it helps us understand our mission and what we're here for. And I think that's enough. I'm speaking a little bit too much more. Anybody have any questions? That's what I thought. No, just kidding. Okay, so tonight will be Nugunim. Tomorrow we'll have Tanya and I think Schneer. I don't know when he teaches. Whatever tomorrow is. Halacha class, laws of Shabbos. We will be starting a new class, learning how to learn. Rabbi Weinberg will be teaching it. You'll learn how to translate the Chumash on your own. You'll learn how to basically read Hebrew, suffixes, prefixes, translations. He has a whole course and curriculum. He's been doing it for many, many years, and he said he'll do it for anybody who wants to join. So I don't know when that's going to be. He's ready to start next week. I have to pick the day. All right. Hopefully I'll see you tonight. Sei gesund. See you later.